What's poppin', y'all? Welcome back. I'm your host, Sha Il. We are on to part 2 of The Connect. Johnny Mitchell interviewing Charlie Webster. Charlie Webster being the executive producer of Surviving El Chapo, along with 50 Cent. If you haven't seen episode 1, you can check out episode 1 and watch them bicker back and forth about the mistakes that Johnny made during his interview. If you have yet to hit the subscribe button, please do. Hit the like button and notification bell, and let's keep this channel moving forward. With that being said, let's get it.
Okay. Can I actually, so let's get into some facts now. Let's talk about like the timeline. And I'll just speed this up because I want to get to them in Mexico when they were fugitives.
Okay.
So who are the Flores twins? It's Peter.
Yeah, and Jay.
Peter and Jay. They grew up in Chicago, but their fathers.
In Little Village. Yeah.
Little Village. We've had people guest on the show who grew up with them and remember them. They drug dealers from a young age, 7 years old. They saw their father.
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
Dishing out kilos of cocaine.
Well, they were used and groomed by their father. So like that's another important point. So to me, as a storyteller, I'm like, well, no, they weren't drug dealers at 7. They were 7. You don't get a choice as a 7-year-old.
Right,
Come on.
Right.
You're a child.
Yeah.
And that's important to remember.
Right.
When you're brought up in that situation, in that life where your father comes out of prison. So the father was in prison, right? Mm-hmm. And the father comes out of prison when they're 7 years old. Their older brother is associated with the Latin Kings in Chicago. And the father grooms them. They don't know what they're doing and uses the twins as, 7-year-old innocent kids to basically move drugs across the border. And so he's got, 2 kids in the back. Oh, yeah, look, my 2 kids. Wow. And uses them to be able to get drugs across the border.
Was he just trafficking in marijuana back then?
Yeah.
The father?
Yeah.
Okay. And was he part of a cartel, the father, or was he just one of these guys, a trafficker for one of the families?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, he was a drug trafficker.
Gotcha.
But a big drug trafficker.
Right. He goes to prison when they're very young, right?
Well, when their mother was pregnant with them, he goes to prison.
Right.
So for the first 7 years
he wasn't even
of their life, he wasn't even there. So when he came out of prison, he basically used the twins to continue his drug dealing and drug trafficking and use them as little kids. And, they were told to count money. They had to wrap marijuana in the gas tanks for him and drive across the border to and fro. And he did it as like, this is an education lesson, not in drugs, but an education in like travel.
Yeah.
So, they drive along like the freeway and be like, this is I don't know, not this country, but this city, this is where the gentlemen go, this is where the horses are, this is the cows, this is blah, 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 so it was like an education trip.
Oh, interesting. So he was like throwing in like geography. He was almost trying to make it like a normal childhood road trip.
He wasn't trying to do nothing. It was a normal childhood road trip for that family. Let's go get some air. We're going to cross this border with all these bricks.
This is America's biggest ball of yarn over here.
Yeah. And
whatever.
Also, and then, if you sold the drugs, he would then take them for like steak and as a reward. And it would like, look, if you do these things and you get money, then you can have this reward. So it was also teaching them about
getting paid.
Business and reward, I think. But, it wasn't like they were like, Dad, we're 7 years old, teach us about drug trafficking. They didn't understand. No 7-year-old really would understand. And that's just part of their life, right? So to me, it is they were groomed into that situation.
They didn't have much of a choice.
No.
And who's the older brother? They have an older brother.
Yeah, called Armando.
And how did he fit into the picture?
So he was part of the Latin Kings, a high up leader.
Right.
I don't know about all that high up leadership, but again, Charlie Webster don't really know shit about Chicago street politics and gangs.
But he didn't want the twins to get into that life. So I'll try and do it quickly because the father got the feds were after the father again. When the twins were like 11, 12 years old. And then he escaped to Mexico as a fugitive and tried to blame it on one of their, not on the twins, but another brother.
See, I don't know what the hell she's talking about. The father tried to blame it on somebody else, on another brother. I don't see the father trying to blame anybody. The father was, as far as the story goes in Surviving El Chapo, the father was sick to his gut when the brothers cooperated, let alone him try to put it on somebody himself. So I don't know what she's talking about. But I don't see the old man talking. The old man wasn't with the whole talking scenario.
And there was nobody left to basically blame it on. So he ran off to Mexico and took the twins. And they were there for about a year and they wanted to be back in Chicago.
Did the brother Armando try to blame it on another brother? Like, that what she's trying to say? I don't know, man. I don't understand what she's trying to... This sounds like word salad. But if it was that brother, then the whole ratting situation, the talking situation started early on that team. Case of emergency, break glass.
Back in Chicago because they weren't very happy.
Yeah.
And so the older brother Armando agreed to look after them in the family home. So they went back and were looked after by Armando. And then Armando got arrested and they were like, at this point, kind of young teenagers, and they were left with bills, like a lot of debt.
Drug debt? Or regular debt? Okay.
Regular debt.
Gotcha.
And so
I'm sure both. I'm sure a little drug debt too. I'm sure the brother didn't get locked up and have everything nice and situated, tucked away, and everybody paid and payroll taken care of. I'm sure he owes some people some money. I'm sure some people owe him some money.
Were left on their own to fend for themselves, and they didn't go. You know, they started working at McDonald's.
Regular. Okay.
Regular debt.
Gotcha.
And so they were left on their own to fend for themselves. And they didn't go, you know, they started working at McDonald's.
Yeah.
You know, as you
lot
know,
of
so many teenagers do, right?
Yeah.
So it wasn't like they kind of went into drug dealing. And I say this not to be like, not as a kind of bias or to stick up for them, purely as fact.
Yeah.
So they went and worked, you know, like so many teenagers do in McDonald's. And then an associate of Armando, the older brother, approached them and said, you know, will you do this for us?
I believe that would be Tommy that came to them with the proposition.
And they had a lot of debt. And so they did that one thing. And then, you know, one thing led to another, right? And what's really interesting about them, whatever anybody thinks, they're extremely clever. They are so intelligent. I've met so many people in my life. I've done so much, so many different walks of life. And you know, they're probably one of the most group intelligent people I've ever met. So if they had applied themselves in a different way, or they'd have had a different upbringing, or I don't know, if their father was a lawyer, then they probably would be
Flores, attorneys at law.
known in a different way. Their names would be known in a different way because they are that smart.
They'd be huge podcasters.
They'd be huge. They'd be sat in your seat.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and I think the combination of them is really interesting as well, because I think that's where their success came from. And that combination of the twin, I think, relationship is really interesting, which made them a huge success. So that's how they ended up in the situation they did. And by the time they were like 17, they'd made $1 million cash.
Are they selling marijuana or is it now cocaine?
Cocaine.
Because we're in the late 90s or mid to late 90s, right? Where is Armando? Did he get sent to prison?
Yeah.
Okay, so now they are really on their own.
Yeah, they're totally on their own.
Wow. And where was the mother?
With the father in Mexico.
In Mexico. Did he ever return to the U.S.?
No.
Is he still a fugitive?
No, he's dead.
Buddy didn't know nothing about the story. So basically, for as many people as shit on reaction channels, you know what I'm saying? This ain't much of an interview channel. This ain't much of an interview, period. I don't know what the rest of his channel is on, but this ain't much of an interview, period. This is a reaction. She's giving him a live breakdown of Surviving El Chapo, and he's reacting to it because he don't know shit about the story.
Right, and this comes into it.
Do you want me to tell you now?
Sure,
why?
What happened? Yeah.
Well, he was murdered by the cartel because of what the twins did.
Wow.
But, so, I should expand on that. So, you asked, did he return to America? So, he did return to the US when the twins cooperated. So, the twins, you know, they cooperated, I'm skipping forward, but we can rewind and then, so I can just tell you this bit.
Yeah, there's a lot to it, so don't worry about that.
So the twins cooperated against El Chapo, and that's why it's called Surviving El Chapo, the twins who brought down a drug lord. And so they were kind of pulled out of Mexico. So the twins are in Mexico, which I know we need to talk about. And they took they said, you know, the father, the brother, the wives, they have to get out of Mexico now. Otherwise, the cartel are going to slaughter the whole family once they find out, right? So they escaped through the Mexico border to the US. And as part of the cooperation, the US gave the father a US visa, right?
Right.
And made sure that he wouldn't kind of get sent back. And so he lived in the States for a while, but then was struggling by all accounts and really wanted to go back to Mexico, which he felt, even though he lived in Chicago, he felt that was his place.
And he was out of the game. They weren't helping him with money.
No.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And the twins are in prison at this point.
Right. Okay.
So no.
Yeah, who's going to help them with money? Everything is shut down. Whatever's buried. The twins are buried. The wives are on the run, basically doing what they got to do. You know what I'm saying? Who's going to help them? Business is over.
And so the father goes back, in a nutshell, he goes back to Mexico. One of Jay's wife, Val, tried to stop him. He went back to Mexico. And then there was a note found and warning the twins to be quiet. And that was the consequence. So the cartel killed their father as a consequence of what the twins did.
Yeah.
And they found out when they were cooperating. And cooperation, which we also need to talk about, isn't, you don't just sit there and go, hey, Johnny, so Chapo did this and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. No,
see ya.
It's not just one meeting.
Years and years and years. They cooperated for years. And it was 6 years before they even knew what their sentence would be. That's how long they cooperated for. In the first 8 months, they cooperated and profited every single day while they were in the shoe in solitary. And so during that time, they were told that, so it was quite early on, that the father had been killed.
So that means right there that it didn't take long. I don't know how long exactly. Maybe we'll find out in the Cartel Wives book. But it seems like the old man went back right away.
Wow. That somebody snuck them a note while they were in the shoe?
No, the note was left
on
the father's car that was found in Mexico.
Oh, so they disappeared his body.
Yeah.
They never even found him.
No.
Are they originally from Sinaloa, or where is his father from in Mexico?
That's a really good question. No, they're not from Sinaloa.
Because I'm curious. So years before, they're now in their early 20s. They're kingpins.
Yeah.
I mean, and young kingpins.
And they're now in Mexico, not in Chicago anymore.
Right. So they tell us about how they ended up in Mexico. I think a lot of people don't know about their fugitive days.
No.
Okay. So go ahead and tell us how that happened.
So I think just something to point out, because I know it's really important to the twins, is that, they are American.
You're right.
Because I think some people mistake, they're not,
It's America's monster. It ain't Mexico's monster.
Their heritage is Mexican. But they're American. They're born and bred in America. They're U.S. citizens.
Yeah.
And they're Chicago people.
Right.
What do you call Chicago people?
Chicagoans. Yeah.
And I think that's really important because they often say, look, when we're Americans, this was done in the US. Because I think you can blame.
Yeah.
There's a tendency to blame Mexicans or blame.
Yeah.
People that aren't from America, right? And so I think that's really important to get
racism
across, and I know it's important to them.
Oh yeah,
So I think that's really important to get across, and I know it's important to them.
Oh yeah. Well, I think if you're born like that, Mexican, if you're from parents from Mexico, again, ignorant Americans. I thought you were Australian. we call people, even Mexican Americans born here, identify themselves. They're like, I'm Mexican. So you say I'm Mexican, but what you're really saying is I'm Mexican born in the U.S. Like how somebody who's first generation will say I'm Italian, but your grandparents are born there.
Yeah.
So, but they were perfectly set up to be kingpins because they've got direct connections to the old country.
Yeah.
So, but yeah.
And they also don't forget how that little education from their father who introduced them to Mexican life in Mexico.
Do you think if they had been from Mexico, they would have cooperated? Because if you're from Mexico, you're...
Well, I don't think they'd have got to where they were.
Right, because they wouldn't have...
And let's not talk cooperation, because we keep talking over and over and over again about how cooperation is weaponized in Mexico. It's not something frowned upon. It's something that they do as a tactic to each other. So to ask that question, would they have cooperated if they was, of Mexican descent. I don't think Johnny Mitchell knows that Mexico weaponizes cooperation and snitching.
Right, because they wouldn't have had the distribution connections in the U.S.
Yeah, so who they were the key to distribution for Chapo.
Right.
Basically. So they were America's biggest drug traffickers at the time.
Yeah.
Because they were the ones that got the cocaine into America. So I don't think they would have got to where they were.
She got on a dope Muhammad Ali t-shirt, though.
This is just my opinion. I don't know.
Why were they so good at distribution? Is it because they had the best product at the lowest price, and that allowed them to go to all the...
That right there is is to be attributed to their smarts. You know what I'm saying? Like I said, these guys logistically were slick, and I think that was what did it.
Why were they so good at distribution? Is it because they had the best product at the lowest price, and that allowed them to go to all the other wholesale distributors and be like, hey, you're not going to find a better deal? Was that how they were able to make so many connections, or is it because they were just such good business people?
Good business people. They broke a language barrier. They didn't just deal with Mexicans. They dealt with blacks. They dealt with other different Latinos. Their smarts, the fact that they were able to observe McDonald's and how that worked as a corporate structure. There was a lot of things that had to do with it. I believe, after hearing the story.
I think they were such good business people.
Okay.
Honestly, like I go back to what I was saying, they're extremely clever, intelligent people.
Where was their cocaine coming from when they were in their late teens, early 20s, before they went on the run, when they were still in Chicago? Who were they? What organization were they working for?
Well,
or with, I'll say.
Well, it did all go back to, the cartels in
But which one?
The Sinaloa cartel.
Okay.
But obviously they didn't know at the time
right.
that it wasn't like they had direct connections to Chapo at the time.
Right.
But it still came from the same,
region. But there was a bunch of, there was the Beltran Levias. There was...
Well, no, they were all together at the time.
This guy called them the Labias.
Oh, it was one federation in the 90s. Levias, there was...
Well, no, they were all together at the time.
Oh, it was one federation in the 90s. Yeah. Interesting. So it was
before the federation split.
So who were they getting it from, though? So who was actually...
Well, I don't know their exact supplier. Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah. But
do you want me to know do you want me to find out his name?
But if they're getting...
I don't know his name.
But if they're getting if they're getting it directly from the cartel, then...
Through people.
Right. Okay. So, but they gotcha, but they don't act...
Yeah, bro, drug dealing didn't start with them. You know what I'm saying? There was somebody else that came and brought it to them. Evidently, in this story, it was Tommy. I guess Tommy was Armando's connect. And when Armando got popped off, he reached out to the twins.
Yeah, they're not on the lines with the Kingpins yet. Okay.
No. That relationship hasn't started. And please ask me about that, because how that relationship with Chapo started is so fascinating.
Yeah.
And totally wild.
Yeah, okay.
So no, at the time, they didn't have that relationship. But I think a few things... and I'd be interested to see what you think, is why they were so good at it. I think, one, they're extremely smart. They learn supply and demand in McDonald's. So going back to McDonald's, this is an amazing story. This is in season 1 at the very beginning. And I love this story because one of the workers, by the way, like 15 years old.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of kids, I look at myself. I was quite entrepreneurial, and I think it's also to do with the fact that, my mum had me as a teenager. I'm from a really poor family. We didn't have any money. So I was always like, I was stacking shelves, and then I was trying to stack the wine at 14, 15 years old and learn about the wines to pretend I knew what I was talking about and all that kind of stuff to, try and elevate myself, and more money. So I think you get that entrepreneurial spirit when you come from nothing, right?
Absolutely.
And you have, sometimes, the majority of the time it's about survival, not about material or pleasure. It's just about being able to survive. So there's a great story when they're working in McDonald's, and one of the workers drops the cheese.
It's not your cheese.
They pick the cheese back up again to use, and Pete's like, "The f you doing? Don't use it again. Just use the other cheese in the fridge. Throw that one away. It's not your money." And I thought that was really interesting, because then they started to learn things like that, where it's like, it's not your money. Don't use all cheese that you've just dropped on the floor. And they started to use these things in distribution, right? So they understood supply and demand through working at McDonald's. And I think they're very charming, which I think makes a difference. So I think they're very likable.
they're also Mexican, and
well, they were trustworthy, but
right.
I think how they got in
was that, and they're also Mexican. Johnny Mitchell, you also a white boy. Could that be why you're as successful as you are, or a big part of it, or was it because you were some big kingpin or something? I don't know.
into so I know we're skipping forward. They also got so infiltrated in the cartel is because they were seen as really trustworthy,
right,
and they were seen as like, they could speak, they were
bilingual,
English and Spanish. They could go between both cultures, American and Mexican. Yeah. But they're really smart people. Not everybody's smart. Not everybody's naturally smart.
Absolutely.
Were they trafficking it themselves across the border when they were, late teens, early 20s? Or did the cartels take care of that for them and then just say, hey,
they weren't trafficking.
He's not understanding that everybody starts somewhere, that they didn't start working for the cartel. He's not getting that part. Now, Val, on the other hand, Val was crossing borders, running back and forth with, gas tanks for the work. So that's a different story.
They weren't trafficking. They weren't doing that at that
age. They were like, there's just going to be a load.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
there's going to be a load here. And then they started to set up, stash houses in Chicago.
Yeah.
And they, only put stash houses in posh, fancy, rich places, right? So you think of to me, they have so much foresight. But again, what I found really interesting when I got to know them is that relationship between them is fascinating, because I'm not sure one person could have done it. Right. So the fact that you've got twins, and so they are chalk and cheese.
Yeah.
So I think that really helps because one of them's super, I mean, they're both charming and they're both.
She just said some British shit, chalk and cheese. I guess that's opposite as hell, chalk and cheese. If that's what it means, I could be reading it all wrong. I don't know. What am I, British?
They're both very polite. Whatever you think, this is fact. They're very polite, very they'll ask you about you. They're very friendly, lovely people. They are genuinely lovely people, and I think that goes a long way, right? You don't get far in business by being an absolute.
Totally.
You don't, because you end up getting found out, and people don't want to work with you, whether you're dealing drugs or, I don't know, working in finance.
That's right.
It's still about relationships and network.
Yeah.
But I think it's the fact that they also had this incredible loyalty because they're twins and they're identical twins that I don't know whether people have. So there was that trust between them, and they never made a decision without each other, and they still like that to this day.
Right.
Which I think is really, really unique.
Totally.
So to me, it's not it's not just about, did they just figure out distribution? To me, it's a lot about but this is how I look at things.
It's more about how they sat down and figured out distribution between the two of them.
As well. It's about who they are as people and the way they did business, and people liked doing business with them, and they were trustworthy and respectful young men, right? Yeah. And they weren't, they were businessmen, and that's how they saw themselves, rather than violent, chaotic people where they were volatile, right? The twins weren't. And I think then, it's like in any walk of life, you start to trust those people, and then they deliver, then you rely on them, then it builds out and builds out and builds out.
For sure. They still have the best price though, because
they have the best price.
That's just goes without saying.
Yeah.
Because they're plugged in. So now tell us about how they ended up on the run, how they ended up in Mexico.
So, they did, they were very successful in Chicago from a very, very young age. And then...
did they give you an idea of the volume they were moving in those days?
Oh, ironically, he's monetized, but my reactions to him get unmonetized. That I don't understand, or demonetized.
Oh, God.
Are we talking 100 kilos a week? Are we talking 1,000 a month?
I do know, and I can't think.
They were millionaires, though.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Gotcha.
But 17.
Yeah, crazy.
So what would that amount to?
I mean, well, it just depends on how much you're moving. It depends on how much they were getting a kilo for and how much they were selling it for. That's all. Yeah. So by the time they're in their early 20s, there's a Fed case that comes down on them, right?
Yeah, and they wanted. So, but then at the same time, one of the brothers, Pete, gets kidnapped. And this is his first kidnap. There's a few kidnaps.
But this is his first kidnap. He gets kidnapped in Chicago.
Yeah.
Dude, this guy don't have bodyguards? How does he keep getting kidnapped?
Bro, did you ever have a fucking bodyguard when you was hustling?
I know, and that's actually a bit of the beef between the two of them because it's the same one that gets kidnapped every time. So
It's
it
like,
becomes
why couldn't
like
Jay get kidnapped once?
yeah, it's like I mean, you know, it's really interesting sometimes listening to them.
That's a contentious part of the story. Jay always seems to be living the lavish life and Pete's in the shit. That's the story.
Argue because I mean, you know, it's really interesting sometimes listening to them argue because when I first got to know them, a lot of the stuff had never been discussed before between them. So it was like fascinating to capture
their feelings for the first time about it.
Yeah, and it was really important to me that, going back to the beginning of our conversation, that I would never have got this story or this insight and been able to bring this story to life if I'd have sat there and judged them.
And of course.
And that's not what I'm here to do. And I, you know, I've spent a lot of time with them. I've spent the last couple of years with them.
Yeah.
And you really get close and you get to know somebody.
Yeah.
And that's the only way that I could have brought the reality of this story. So I was part of a lot of arguments as well.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
it was interesting to listen. And one of them was, you know, but you don't understand. I was kidnapped. But Jay's like, yeah, but I was the one that had to get out of these situations. So that's also a
right. It's also, it's not pretty on the outside either. You know, one guy, you know, while he's living the lavish life, now he got to stop living the lavish life and figure that shit out and rescue you. But again, two sides to every coin and perspective is everything.
That's also a pressure. Right. And that also has a, you know, an impact on you.
Of course.
But yeah, it was always Pete
Who
was kidnapped.
Who kidnapped him the first time?
Well, the first time it was a guy who became known as basically somebody who's called Saul, who kept kidnapping people for money. Yeah. And that's what he became known for.
That's Saul. So that's dirtbag Saul right there. Yeah, he looked like a dirtbag. He looked like he peeped through windows and shit.
So he kidnapped Pete, and but Jay found out who kidnapped him and then managed to get him. But he disguised himself as police.
Oh, right.
But Pete was like, I know you're not police.
Oh, so did he pull him over or something? Or he knocked on his door?
Bro, you're a reaction channel, bro. I'm a little disappointed at this. Like, even if she was going to break down the whole thing, you should at least listen to the podcast. Oh, but it's 8 episodes. Well, you know, you got time.
Did he pull him over or something? Or he knocked on his door?
No, he was on a motorbike, basically, and then grabbed him as pretending they were feds, and then it wasn't. But it's really interesting because they don't get their revenge on him straight away, but they do get revenge on him years later.
She's giddy about it, though. She like, you love the life too, Charlie. Stop fronting. It's okay to tell the truth, Charlie. Charlie. Come on, you love the game. You love the game. It's an exciting game. She's happy about the final strike on Saul. Look at her. Giddy.
But they do get revenge on him years later when they end up cooperating.
Right. Oh, wow.
Get my drift.
Yes.
And I found that interesting as well because, you know, going back to why they were so successful.
Revenge is a dish best served cold.
You know, going back to why they were so successful, I'm not sure I would have been able to emotionally control myself like that if somebody had done that to me. But they did emotionally control themselves, and it was all about strategy.
That's right. Patience.
Patience, strategy, the long game, rather than, we're going to go and get him for kidnapping.
How much did Jay have to pay to get Pete out?
Oh, God, I have no idea.
Okay.
A lot of money.
Right. So
and negotiating and a group of people to help negotiate.
Right.
And so then after that, they fled to Mexico.
Oh, so they didn't go on the run because there was a DEA warrant out for them.
Oh no, they did, yeah.
Okay, so there was
it just happened at the same time.
Wow. Okay, yeah, damn. So the heat's coming up. The heat's coming down.
Yeah,
okay.
So Jay left, you know, and that's at the same time he married Val.
Right.
Who's his wife. And
they all went on the run together. They brought the kids.
In the end, yeah. So like Val and Jay went over, and then they went over first, and then Pete, met them across the border, and then they fled to Mexico as fugitives when they were like, 20, 21 years old.
Where were they hiding out? Were they in Sinaloa?
Lots of places.
Oh, so they were moving around.
Yeah, not Sinaloa.
Okay.
They didn't go to Sinaloa. until they met Chapo.
Gotcha. And tell us how they met.
So
Charlie excited about the long game, huh? She excited about them getting their revenge years later. You love the game, Charlie. It's okay. Because even the people that don't play the game and just watch the game for entertainment, they love the game too. They'll tell the story and say that they don't, but they love the game too.